I'm going to bring the podium up today. I got a lot of stuff I've got to keep track of here. So we are well into our series on the book, Who Have You Come Here to Be? Which we are doing both as a Sunday series and a Wednesday evening class series, which has really been a lot of fun. And I know that I'm getting a lot out of it, and I sure hope those of you who've been coming on Wednesday night have as well. But even those of you who don't make it on Wednesday night, I hope are getting a good deal out of this. And I think we still have one or two more copies of this left in the bookstore. And if you haven't gotten it, it is really, really a wonderful tool. What it's filled with is different ways of being, and 101 of them. And it's divided up into sections sort of based on the elements. And we've talked about the section based on the element of fire and the section based on the element of earth. And today we talk about the section based on the element of water. And the title for that in the book is Awake and Awed, because it refers to the quality of water that is very present in this moment. Water reacts to its surroundings and its circumstances. It may freeze and become ice. It may flow easily. It may evaporate into steam, all based on what is happening in this present moment. And when we are present in the moment, it is difficult for us not to be awake. When the Buddha, was finally approached as he sat under the Bodhi tree, and he was asked, "Who are you? What are you?" His response was, "I am awake." One of the most desired journeys on the spiritual path, and one of the first ones that we have to take as we advance in consciousness, is simply to become awake to what is. And that's one of the reasons that in meditation we talk about focusing on our breath, because that is one of the easiest, most simple practices we have for anchoring us in the present moment. It happens as we live. Our breathing is just right now. We can't live on yesterday's breath of air. We have to live in the moment. And truly, to be in the moment, to be aware of what is going on around us, is to be in awe. Whether we are standing outside and really awake to what the trees look like, to what the clouds look like, or on a cloudless night to what the stars look like. How many times have we passed by those things unconsciously and taken them for granted? When a moment's awareness, a moment's presence will leave us in awe of all that is. So within this chapter, which is filled with ways of being that in one way or another might remind us of a quality that is watery, is flowing, there were some very specific key ideas that I wanted to unfold a little bit for you this morning. And the first one is that water follows the path of least resistance. Right? Water follows the path of least resistance. And that's one of the reasons that in some of the other traditions that talk about the elements, water is assigned the quality of intuition or wisdom, because following the path of least resistance is kind of a wise thing to do. In Matthew, Jesus is recorded to have said, "But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer, But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. This is one of his many difficult teachings for us to swallow sometimes. Yeah. We have a saying in Unity, and other people do as well, that which we resist persists, And certainly water's ability to flow around areas of resistance speaks to that. In this chapter, we see some very flowing around those areas of resistance qualities, including content, understanding, and grace. When I first saw that quality, content, I kind of thought, well, gee, aren't we, is content just kind of like giving up or sort of laying back? But the truth is there is a very spiritually mature quality in being content with what is. And as we picture in our mind water flowing to where it is open rather than trying to fill space that is not, we see contentment. It's like, there is a space for me after all. Might not be where I was originally headed, but there's a space for me here. I can be here, and I can choose to be content rather than being resentful or dissatisfied or unsettled, angry, in fear, or any of those other negative emotions that we can choose when life is not what we expected. A piece of that comes from our understanding. Now, the quality of understanding that they speak of is being able to understand other people who are somehow different from us. This is one that is especially difficult at times today as we continually rub up against people whose ideas are different from our own. And it can be everything from a simple, discussion over theology at the dinner table some nights to the political debates that go on in society. We are becoming more and more polarized as a nation. What we need to learn is that understanding, because part of what water does when it flows to the open space is it leaves a space for that other thing to be. Now, over time, over the years, yes, water can dissolve just about anything. We see that out west in the Grand Canyon. We see it right here as we look at our own mountains worn down over the millennia by the power of water. And so maybe a lesson for us there is not to push against things quite so hard, but simply to lap up against them, to be with them, to move by them, and to allow the action of the years to wear down that resistance. One of the other major qualities that the authors mention is that water demonstrates the power of presence, as it demonstrates the ability to adapt to change. And at another point in the gospel attributed to Matthew, Jesus is purported to have said, and in this particular place, he is in Jerusalem. It's towards the end of his ministry, and he's being questioned by leaders of the temple. And so he tells them a parable. He says, "What do you think? A man had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, 'Son, go and work in the vineyard today.' He answered, I will not. But later he changed his mind and went. The father went to the second and said the same, and he answered, I go, sir. But he did not go. Which of the two did the will of his father? They said, the first. Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are going into the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John the Baptizer, came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him. And even after you saw it, you did not change your minds and believe him. When he talks about the kingdom of God, he's not talking about getting into some magical place that we show up at after we die. He's talking about right here, right now. And that ability that we have and use or have and don't use to change our perception, to be able to experience life in the kingdom of heaven right here, right now, or not. So here he has these people who are supposed to be the teachers. They're supposed to be the higher ups in the religion of the day, but they don't get it. And they're sticking to their guns, not getting it, simply because that's the way things were. Where these other people, and he uses tax collectors and prostitutes as an example, they're willing to change. They're willing to do something different, to believe something different, to change their lives based on what is happening in the moment, on the new knowledge that is presented to them in the moment. Now, some of the qualities that the authors talk about in here: open, present, resonant, speak very much to our ability to be aware, to become awake to what is happening in this moment. In my other faith tradition, the one that has 12 steps, we like to say how it works. And how is an acronym for honest, open-minded, and willing. That openness it's vital to any kind of spiritual advancement. Once we think we have it figured out, we're done. We have stopped growing. And that is me, that is you, that's everybody. Charles Fillmore, one of the co-founders of Unity, was teaching a class one time, and he asked a question, and one of the students raises his hand and shoots out an answer, and Charles looked at him and said, "Where'd you hear that?" And the student said, You said that." And Charles is, famously recorded to have replied, "Well, I reserve the right to change my mind." And as the Unity movement has continued to evolve, I would say that even today, if Charles had available to him the Bible scholarship that we have now and the scientific knowledge that we have now, his beliefs about unity would look very different, because he was willing to change his mind. So many of us come from faith backgrounds where there was no changing. It was this way or you were outside, right? One of the things that's always appealed to me about this and other religious traditions like this is that we get to evolve, we get to adapt, we get to be open. We can find those things that resonate with us as new things are revealed, new truths are revealed. We are able to move a little higher in consciousness instead of being stuck in a place. stuck with ideas that were formulated, in some cases, 2,700 years ago. We're not stuck. We get to flow. We get to move. We get to stay open. Now, the third quality that they talked about in here that I'm going to mention is that water is sometimes referred to as the universal solvent. And what the ladies say is that those water qualities can dissolve and remove the blocks to our wholeness. And once again, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus alludes to this in kind of a metaphysical fashion when he says, he called a child whom he put among them and said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depth of the sea." And then he goes on, and this is one of those other places that sometimes we have difficulties with. "Woe to the world because of stumbling blocks. Occasions for stumbling are bound to come, but woe to the one by whom the stumbling block comes. If your hand or foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or lame than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and to be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and to be thrown into the hell of fire." Wow, Jesus. Seriously, dude? You know, that's one of those ones that most of us are like, flip the page, scary stuff. He's speaking metaphorically and allegorically, and what that contains is something very, very important to us, that parable. You know, so many of us have things that are parts of us that are preventing us from getting into the kingdom of heaven, that are holding us back from the reality that is all that is in God. I'm an alcoholic, you know. For years, decades, I had something in this hand, right? It took me a long time to cut that off. And I still work with it, day by day, one day at a time. I had to cut that hand off, that thing that was my best friend for so long, I thought. It became my best enemy, right? So many of us have things that we have to cut off from our lives. It might be the job that we thought was going to, feed us into retirement. It might be a spouse or a partner that we thought we were going to be with forever. Sometimes we have to cut those things off because they're the stumbling blocks that are keeping us from really living in the kingdom. When we talk about plucking out an eye, he's saying, how are you seeing the world? Maybe this way of seeing the world is not serving you. Maybe this way of looking at life is keeping you out of the heaven that's right here and right now. Change the way you see. That's what he's talking about. Now, in order to do that, again, we go to some of the qualities that they talk about in here. Healed, faith-filled, unlimited. That's how I remove stumbling blocks from my life. I become filled with faith. I heal myself. The last couple of weeks, I talked about people who are characters in popular culture. And this week, as I went through these, open, compassionate, wonder-filled, present, healed, unique, content, loved, faith-filled, noble, poised, blessed, resonant, understanding, divine, grace-filled, valuable, unlimited, holy, purposeful, free. One person came to me. She's at Unity Village right now. It's my wife. She's the best example I have ever seen of all those in one person. I could talk about the healing that she has accomplished in her life over the years. Some things I will not share. But just to give you an example of the things that are possible, the blocks that can be removed from our lives when we have the faith to do the work. When she was a teenager, she was hit by a drunk driver. And thankfully, the night they brought her into the emergency room, there was actually a plastic surgeon on duty. You wouldn't know it to look at her, but the right side of her face has been reconstructed. She was told that her left leg would be crippled for the rest of her life, that she would never be able to walk normally. By doing the work, that same work that we talk about, by believing in herself, believing in her body, believing in her wholeness, and then getting out and hitting the street, she's able to run. Maybe a decade later, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Now, what any of us do with any kind of diagnosis is between us and God and our physicians, and we all have to do that which resonates for us as being the right thing to do. She is someone who is very sensitive to chemicals and the practices of Western medicine. She went to a Russian healer who used to be a Soviet general. He's now living in Los Angeles doing natural healing. And with his help, she completely healed herself of cancer. Again, by knowing her own wholeness, by knowing her own divinity, by removing the blocks to her wholeness from her life that she found when she went within to do the work. So many of us have resistances in our lives today. We are resisting doing what we know we are called to do. We are butting up against something that we cannot change, but part of our heart or our mind or our ego is attached to. And we smash it again and again and again instead of flowing around it into that space of contentment and joy that is prepared for us. Friends, today I can tell you that there is a place right here, right now, in each of our consciousness that we can flow to like water when we know we are divine, when we know that this life is holy, when we are open to all that is good in God, and when we are filled with the faith that it is right here and right now. This week, I invite you to bring that consciousness, that energy of water into your being, and to be awake to all that you are and all that God is. And I know that you will be in awe.